Is anyone still outside?
The shelf is broken. We forgot. Today's the first day we've done that. She has someone selling it. She has next to
Ready?
Sanye Chirang Soki Choknam Jamshu Bayu Takni Kyasuchi Yaki Jinchen Yipe Saranam Ki Roa Benchir Sangye Jupasho Sanye Chirang Soki Choknam Ba Jamshu Bayu Takni Kyasuchi Yagi Jinchen Yipe Saranam Ki Rola Benchir Sangye Jupasho Sanye Chirang Soki Choknam Na Jamshu Bayu Yakni Kyasuchi Yagi Jinchen Yipe Saranam Ki Rola Benchir Sangye Jupasho.
Find a comfortable meditation posture. Feel your energies grounded in your feet and legs. And today, this morning specifically, find the weightedness at the base of your spine. As though there were very heavy lead hanging there, and naturally bringing your body to equilibrium. And then find those upward moving energies that counterbalance so that you don't collapse in a heap. What is it that enables you to sit up at all? You can be aware of that counterbalance in your arms as well. Both the weightedness and the lightness. So your shoulders are relaxed. But without slumping. Your neck is long but without tension. Your head is resting very gently and evenly on your spine. Then find the exhale. And don't stop it. Let it keep going as long and as far as you need to. This morning I'd like everyone to try the full body awareness of breath. So you hold your awareness very broadly, and the object of your attention are the tactile sensations associated with the movement of the breath through your entire body. And the key here is to keep your attention alert and broad enough so that you can detect the great variety of sensations that will arise, but without being dragged off to any one of them. You continue to take in the whole field as if you are looking at a vast landscape and not getting distracted by one detail or another, but just taking in the whole landscape. Here, that landscape is the tactile field of your body. Try to become more and more sensitive to the transitions of in-breath and out-breath. The mystery of where each breath might actually start. Precision of how far you can release before it's truly over. That space between the very end of the exhale and the next inhale is sacred space where you're completely released and potentially free of thought, as long as you don't keep talking. So let your inner voice go silent. And gently let your energy and your attention settle in your heart, falling back, releasing into this center. Try to taste right away what your most basic longing is. What do you seek in this life? And you can continue to refine that thought if you're not totally satisfied with the way it first comes to you. Try to broaden your perspective and your scope as much as you can without losing the clarity and specificity of your aspiration. And then think of one person you've known in this life who most embodies your own aspirations. It doesn't necessarily mean you want to be just like this person, but they somehow manifest or teach or exhibit for you virtuous, sacred qualities that you admire and aspire to yourself. And it's okay if many different people come to mind, but try to just let your mind fall on one being and call the presence of that person to the space of the air in front of you. And insofar as you admire the qualities of this person and recognize them as transmission or embodiment of enlightened qualities, let your heart bow down. This time, rather than something you've done in the past as your offering, try to think of something you aspire to, something you hope to do in the next month or year or 5 years, and offer that in the form of a bouquet of flowers to this person, letting those flowers embody that which you will become. And then think of one thing that you feel is stopping you, preventing you from being that person or accomplishing that goal right now. Why has it not yet come? If it is simply lack of circumstances, you can confess the causes for that too. But try to find some deep seed within yourself that you know must be purified in order for you to be able to make that offering as you wish. Try to look into this person's eyes and ask them to help clean you of this seed, this obstacle. And then think of some goal in the past that you have reached. It could be a long time ago, it could be recently. But we all know the feeling of accomplishment. Finishing something. That feels good. It feels right. As you look into the face of this teacher, this role model, see their smile, their joy in you. And try to identify something you need from the world, from your teachers, in order to reach this goal, whether it be short-term or long-term. What guidance especially do you need? You can ask this teacher, this spiritual friend, to shower down on you specific instructions, specific resources, specific opportunities that you will need. And simply appreciate what this person's presence is for you, whether you've met them directly or simply know about them. And still holding the gaze, this person, ask them directly to stay in your lap. And by staying, to bless you, to change you, to grant you the capacity to become more like them, to better embody the qualities that you admire. Then you can see this being, this person, who is more than human for you now. Joyfully express their own wish to remain with you, be with you. You can see their body as you know them transform into shining light. And rise higher in the air. Also becoming smaller and more intense, light brighter and brighter. As this being floats into the space above your own crown. Without losing the focus on this being of light above you, be aware of how your own energy system changes in response to this presence. Is it really imagined? Or is someone there? Call upon this being to enter your own heart. See the form of light become smaller and smaller. Until this presence can descend through your central channel just in front of the spine to the level of your heart. As the complete embodiment of that which you wish to become. No longer the specificities of someone else you know in the world, but the perfect manifestation. The awakened being you wish to be. Then let the light from this presence, this identity in your heart fill your whole body. Like light filling a room. Clearing out all images of bones and flesh, organs, or blood. Letting your whole body be filled with transparent light. And gently begin to open your eyes and feel yourself present in this room as that being. Grounded and ethereal at the same time. Translucent to yourself, but fully embodied for others. As I said, we'll do more meditations in the course of the day, so they'll kind of build on each other. In order to taste what these teachings are really about, this weekend in particular, but really anytime you're trying to grapple with these very complex philosophical ideas on existing through characteristics, existing without characteristics of its own, nature of illusion. What is it for a mind not to exist inherently? Will be a big theme today. Try to keep in mind how understanding illusion quite precisely can be the doorway to the sacred. I said a few days ago that this notion of sacred illusion, illusion not as implying something doesn't matter or something isn't important, but rather illusion in the sense of something that looks real but isn't real, looks one way but doesn't actually exist that way. And as we know, there are examples of illusions, very common illusions, that are very beautiful to us. Rainbows perhaps being a prime example. The sparkles of light on water. A lot of illusions that have to do with the play of light. That can help remind us that, as I've been saying, everything we ever see in our visual field is only coming to us through the play of light, even when the things look quite solid. But as we peel back the layers, and again, it takes hard work to do the analytical process, but as we peel back the layers, hope that it can give you, and this will sound contradictory, a more and more tangible sense of how things are intangible. Like maybe that feeling you got at the end of the meditation of something that is fully here and yet not as it appears. Something that is present but porous and transparent. And it's not that there's anything inherently wonderful about transparency. You know, there can be really solid things in a Buddha paradise, and they manifest the qualities of solidity quite magnificently. But it's the knowledge that things are malleable and not rock solid as the problems they appear to be to us. You know, so solidity and liquidity, or solidity and transparency, start to become metaphors for the way that our suffering world or our obstacle-ridden world appears to us. Do you get the connection? Like we were doing this whole meditation on goals and obstacles, what we need to purify. This is what the whole path is about. And so to the extent that the world feels fixed to us, that can be analogized to solidity, really there, intractable, not going to change. And to start to recognize in the minutiae, day to day, hour to hour, how we're thinking of things as unchangeable. I mean, that's the first step of Mahamudra, or understanding things to have no self in the way they appear. It's just realizing they're constantly changing. And we know that, and we can say that, but to realize that the very situations that seem to be damaging us or stopping us, harming us, can never stay fully the same for even a few seconds, much less in the course of months and weeks. And so that's just on the basis of change. But once you start to taste that every identifiable characteristic of a situation, notice how I'm flying this now, it's not about the location of the flower in space-time. It's about the characteristics of our situation. It's about the characteristics of the things that are hurting us. It's about the characteristics in ourselves we don't like or want to change. If they're not really there, if they're being created by mind and by causes and conditions that are constantly being planted and replanted by mind, that's when you start to see you have infinite potential. See the connection? That if you start to realize that everything you can identify with your mind and your heart is about characteristics. That's this word, lakshana, or tinyi. If you have a better word than characteristics, great, please tell me. It's just one that I've happened to fall upon. Maybe qualities is better. But the very fact that we can experience anything as anything is characteristics. And so the question is, where are those characteristics coming from? And the reason one reason why the philosophy can be so helpful is because if one has sort of an entry-level understanding of, well, those characteristics are coming from me, and then we turn around and start beating ourselves up for somehow projecting or producing those characteristics, but we don't fully, in a nuanced way, understand how to change the characteristics that are appearing to us, or we're really trying with our daily practice, but it seems like things aren't changing as fast or fully as we want them to. That's when you might get the motivation to say, okay, I've got to get more settled about this. How many layers of inner and outer are there? So just almost as a follow-up from yesterday, a side note, when I was trying to explain to you a particular perspective on what it would mean for something to have characteristics of its own, if it could. You know, we always have to have that hypothetical situation. And I was pointing to flower and saying it's not about the definition of flower, because that would be an abstraction. In the case of defining characteristics, we're talking about something. I came on this very contemporary phrase of location in space-time. But here is a passage actually from Gyaltsabje. And it's a little bit disputed, and I'm not going to go into that, whether this is really what Gyaltsabje thought. But it's roughly enough an image of what having its own characteristics would mean, and I saw something very similar in a text by Jitsikapa as well. So Gyaltsabje writes, now analyze this. If something has its own characteristics, then it remains unmixed with its own location, at its own time, and with its own essence. So those were the three key things: space, time, and identity. This is the unique meaning of an actual object, thing out there, that has its own characteristics in terms of its conceptual isolation. And that's a complex word that has to do with the way it is the opposite of all that it's not. You've heard that phrase before. So even though in order to know something as the opposite of all that it's not, you're already conceptualizing it. A way to think of a thing that would have its own characteristics is as something unmixed in space, in time, and in essence. And then here are the examples he gives. An unmixed location means that if something is staying in the east, it would be a contradiction for it to stay in the west. And my sense is that's like an analogy here would be for that cup to be there, it would be contradictory for it to be over there. Cup can be in many places in this room at once, because cup is an abstraction, and there can be many cups. But the specificity of that, okay? So that's unmixed location. Unmixed time means that if something takes place in the morning, it would be a contradiction for it to take place in the afternoon. So my speech now, hey, is not, even if you can hear a sound or identify a sound, or I say sound and you think of the word sound, you can think of the word sound in the afternoon and have the abstraction of it and think, oh, sound, same thing. But the articulation of sound at 10:50 in the morning is not the same as what it is. You get my point? An unmixed essence is said to mean that if a functioning thing has many colors, then it would be contradictory for it to exist where there is pale yellow. It's quite ironic that that was my example yesterday. So the specificity of this whole arrangement is a coarse thing with a lot of particulars, and it can also be a particular. It's contradictory for this arrangement to have the essence of pale yellow. I'm not going to go into the rest of that, though. So that's just a little backup. So I think somebody asked me after the class yesterday, so do we know yet what the difference between the mind-only school is and the middle way? And I'll say, no, we haven't gotten there yet. But I do want to give you 3 things that if you are taking notes, it's good to write these down, because it's almost the structure of the whole middle section of both Kirti's text, Entering the Middle Way, and Tsongkhapa's commentary on it, Illumination of the True Thought. And these 3 principles structure his being both Kirti and Tsongkhapa, entire refutation of the mind-only school. And for me, it's not just in order to say, oh, I know something about the Illumination of the True Thought, or what's there, or what's in the book. If you can grasp what these 3 ideas are, you can grasp what it might be in your own mind that's holding on to mind in a certain way. So first, the idea that a foundation consciousness could ever exist through a nature of its own as something other than the stream of mental consciousness. I said yesterday this idea that you have to posit a 7th and an 8th consciousness in order to account for grasping to self and the storage of karmic seeds. And so there's something about needing to posit separate consciousnesses other than mental consciousness itself, even though there seem to be moments when the continuum of mental consciousness is dormant, that holding on to something separate is thinking of consciousness in a self-existent way, thinking of consciousness as having to really be there. And so the second idea that's being refuted, so the first idea in brief is a foundation consciousness. That's defined as something that could exist through a nature of its own as something other than a stream of mental consciousness. Because you could apply the word foundation consciousness or substrate consciousness to the subtle continuum of mental consciousness, and then that's no problem. As a thing that doesn't exist through its inherent nature. Okay, I'm responding to your face. So we do have a stream of mental consciousness. We meditated on it briefly yesterday. The simple experience of being aware and having a space of the mind and its contents. Even in extremely deep sleep, even in the death process, that stream goes on in a continuum. That's why one has to add the word subtle level, because the coarse consciousness does break down quite thoroughly in the death process. But that, in order to exist, doesn't have to exist inherently. And there's something about the way that foundation consciousness is posited as separate from that, a place where seeds are stored, that almost in the very positing of it, according to Jason Kappa, it necessitates that it exists through some nature. I'm not going to go on and on about that because I hope it'll just keep coming clearer. So that was the first thing that's refuted. The second thing that's refuted is the idea that a consciousness existing with nothing outside of itself could ever exist through its own nature. So a foundation consciousness that would be separate from mental consciousness that could exist through its own nature. Or a consciousness with nothing outside of itself, which is a very common phrase in those mind-only school texts. Consciousness with nothing outside. Something like that could ever exist through its own nature. And finally, the third thing that's refuted is a special kind of simultaneous reflexive awareness, rangre. Apperception. Okay. The idea that such a special kind of simultaneous reflexive awareness could ever exist as a final arbiter of valid perception by which to establish dependent things as ultimate reality. So that's a big sentence, but and we're not going to get into this too much, so I'll kind of just say it and leave it. The idea that there's a part of the mind in a mind-only view, it's strange, a little bit strange, and I remember this being an insight that I got during a Tibetan class at Thomaling Nunnery, and it was so exciting to me because it was one of the first times I thought I just understood something new based upon the Tibetan that I thought I couldn't understand. So I'll offer you this insight for what it's worth. The mind-only school says that what we ordinarily think of as inner and outer are really just one substance, consciousness, right? But in another, so that's two things that appear to be two, they say no, are really one. But then they take consciousness and bifurcate it in an extra way that the middle way school says isn't true and you didn't need to do. It's kind of odd, right? They take the whole of our experience and say that's really one thing. But consciousness itself is split into two. And it's not inner and outer. But it is kachir and kanang. Kachir being literally mouth open or mouth facing open. And but it means the consciousness that looks outward, and you can say projects outward. And so it's the part of consciousness that's appearing as an outer world. And kanang being the part of consciousness that turns inward and identifies itself as consciousness. And so that's the rangrik, or the apperception, which the mind-only school, that some members of the mind-only school posit, as the idea that in order to have a memory, you need to have been aware at the time you're experiencing the thing, simultaneously aware of awareness in order to know that it was there. Now this gets quite complex in certain meditative schools. I'm not going to try not to get into it for now because it is still possible to meditate on awareness of awareness. It's a major practice and it's a doorway to Mahamudra and Dzogchen. But you don't have to posit it as being absolutely simultaneous, two parts of the consciousness splitting off. That's the part that's not acceptable in the middle way view. Is it okay if I continue now? I think
this is connecting to the 7th and 8th consciousnesses you were speaking of.
No, these are three different ideas. The whole thing that I'm teaching right now are three different ideas that are refuted by Chandakirti. The first one was foundation consciousness as an 8th consciousness. The second thing that's refuted would be any kind of consciousness that could exist with nothing outside of itself and through an inherent nature. And the third thing that's refuted is a special part of consciousness that is reflexive, simultaneous to the consciousness that appears as outer objects.
Which was the 7th?
No, the 7th consciousness is the Nyunyi, or the afflictive meditation, which basically means grasping to an eye. And I haven't talked about it much, and I'm not going to talk about it much. And it is almost tangentially refuted by the middle way position, but they focus much more on refuting the foundation consciousness than the afflictive meditation consciousness. So don't worry about the 7th one right now. But to not lose the point on rangre, or reflexive awareness, what I'm saying is it is definitely possible to do meditations where you are aware of the experience of being aware. That's not what's being refuted. So it's not what's being refuted, it's the awareness of being aware. One moment of awareness being aware of two completely different things is what's being refuted. So awareness can't bifurcate. And remember, if you ever were confused about this one, just think of Master Shantideva's, a sword can't cut itself. A lamp can't light itself. Now I always have a harder time with the lamp can't light itself part, because you sort of say, well, the lamp is lighting itself because the shade reflects it back in it. But what it actually means is light can't light itself. Its nature is to be light. The nature of awareness is to be aware. So it can be, in a sense, aware of a vast scope of things at the same time, as we tried to do when being aware of the entire field of the body. But you can't split a single moment of awareness. This one takes a lot of thinking. And frankly, that's where I got stuck in my own reading of the Umagombarab cell, is the reputation of Rundring. I haven't fully grokked it yet, for sure. But the reason it becomes important in the mind-only school is as the arbiter or the proof for dependent things. Because the notion that you have to be able to have a direct perception of something in order to establish it as having characteristics of its own. So in Dharmakirti's system, you would have to be able to have a direct, non-conceptual perception of yellow in order to establish the yellow that is unmixed in location, time, and essence, with no conceptual thought, just appearance to eye consciousness. And that would be a non-conceptual perception. But everybody agrees it's really, really difficult to have such a thing that's unmixed with conceptuality. Now, in deep states of meditation, you might be able to have direct yogic perception of certain things, even not at a emptiness level, but just directly perceiving things without conceptual intermediaries. But what, as we said, the mind-only school is rejecting outer form that could have individual characteristics of its own, that there could really be a particle out there that's unmixed in time, location, and essence. But they want to say that moments of consciousness are really there, and the way that you establish them as really being there is with the part of awareness that can perceive them directly in an unmediated way in the very instant they exist. So you would have to have a perception in order to establish consciousness that exists through characteristics of its own. And so by refuting apperception, that's the middle way's really final blow to the mind-only school, because they're refuting the very proof. I want to say proof text, but it's not a text. It's their. That's why I use the word final arbiter. That may sound like a fancy word, but it really isn't appropriate. The final arbiter of valid perception by which to establish dependent things, principally mind itself, as existing ultimately. So again, I'm not going to say too much more about that, because I don't think it's actually the most important thing in the next 2 days. But so you have the scope of the 3 things about the mind-only school that Chandrakirti and Jetsurkapa explicitly reject. Nowhere in there is the idea of karmic tendencies creating your world. So he doesn't reject that. Okay? Is that helpful? So our next topic is to clarify this meaning of the word only in mind only, because we've already glimpsed that the Buddha has said the 3 realms are mind only. Nobody doubts that appears in Mahayana Sutras, more than one. The Sutra on the 10 Levels and the Journey to Lanka Sutra. I'll say more about those shortly. No one refutes that the Buddha said it, but the point is, what did he mean by it? And this is the one. I will just very briefly read to you the answer to question 11 in ACI course 15, class 8. Okay, just so you know, this is going to be a commentary, an extra commentary on the answer to that question, which I vividly remember first being exposed to the class when Michael explained it. I was like, there's a lot there. I want to know more about that one. So it took me about 10 years to get back to it. No, more like 13 years. That was probably in 2003 that I first read. So the question, or the homework question is, explain where the name of the mind-only school comes from. And the answer key says this. Jetsurkapa explains this point in his Illumination of the True Thought, the book we're in now. He first quotes the Sutra of the 10th Level, which says that these 3 realms of existence are mind only. He goes on to explain that the real meaning of mind only here is that, quote, mind is the main thing that creates the world, and not something physical or some creator deity. I just changed that from God. He says creator God. I just prefer to say deity. He says that the expression, quote, mind only is therefore only an abbreviation for the expression mind alone is the main thing. You know, so it doesn't literally just mean mind only. Mind alone is the main thing. The way that the mind creates the world is by causing us to collect karma. The point is not that we just make up the world with our mind, as we know. I can't make those flowers red no matter how hard I try. So here, sorry for a little more reading, but I will give you the section of the Illumination of True Thought that Geshe Michael was almost certainly looking at or thinking of when he wrote that answer. So this is actually Jetsurkapa's paraphrase of Chandrakirti. Nonetheless, out of fear of being disproven by scripture, you must still agree that things are mind only. And this is the mind-only school person saying, hey, come on. For fear of being disproven by scripture, you have to agree that things are mind-only. After all, as it is stated in the 10 levels, this is the Sutra on the 10 levels. Think it over. I actually want to give you the Tibetan for this very briefly. Dedi nyamdu semte, itar kam sumpo dini semtamte, itar kam sumpo dini semtamte. Kam sumpo are the 3 realms. Semtam are mind only. And the nyamdu sem is like spin it around in your own mind. Nyamdu is think about it, and sem is in your mind. So I translated it as think it over, but it's this phrase that gets repeated over and over in the sutra. You know how the sutras have a rhythm to them. And so the Buddha keeps saying, te dis nyamdu sem te ditar kamsu bodhini sem tsam te. Think it over. In this way, these three realms are mind only. And don't worry if you don't get the whole metaphor here, but it's just such great language. The middle way proponent responds, "O you who, when you fix upon the earth foundation of the sutras, made of the sapphire jewels of the victor's speech expressed, since you do not know it to be sapphire, you mistake it, completely transforming it into the aspect of the water, i.e. sapphire to water, the water of those who profess consciousness to be the real functioning thing. Since you want to twist it into being, quote, nothing more than the water of professing consciousness to be the real functioning thing, you cast away the fresh vase of your own intelligence, and scrubbing and filling, though you read 100 passages, you turn them into the same old joke that, quote, their nature is consciousness. However, the true intent of the sutras may appear to your intellect. That's not it. If you then ask, what is the meaning of the sutra? I will explain it. And that's a very close paraphrase of Chandakirti. I forget whether Jinso Kappa really changed it at all, or he just took this thing. I did my best. I hope I didn't mess it up. And so then the next verse from Chandakirti, and remember we're in the 6th chapter on the Bodhisattva who's reached the 6th Bodhisattva level, and somehow his understanding of emptiness, both in his direct perception and his aftermath understanding, has just skyrocketed. And this is one of the verses that almost describes the Bodhisattva at the 6th level. The Bodhisattva who has brought forth, who stands before, who realizes what it means for the three realms of existence to be consciousness alone, due to the realization that refutes as maker an unchanging self, realizes that the creator is nothing more than mind. I'll read that verse again. And you should know that the phrases there, these are very technical Buddhist phrases. Ngunjur, nguncho, changchup sempadi. So, Bodhisattva who has brought forth, who stands before those, that actually stands before is the name for the 6th Bodhisattva level. Ngunchopa, yeah. I think at one point Geshe Michael translated that as almost there, in the sense of you're on the verge of it. Ngunchopa means the direction, you're manifesting the direction, or you're facing toward the direction. It's a very hard term to translate. And then, so it's, yeah, I think I actually translated the word twice by saying who stands before, who realizes, because it means both things. The Bodhisattva who has brought forth, who stands before, who realizes what it means for the three realms of existence to be consciousness alone, he's using that phrase, due to the realization that refutes as maker an unchanging self, realizes that the creator is nothing more than mind. So Jetokappa's explanation of Chandakirti's commentary clarifies that this verse refers to a bodhisattva at the 6th level who, having refuted other kinds of supposed creators, comes to understand that the scriptural references to the three realms being nothing more than mind all mean that the maker is deceptively only a mind, nothing more than that. So then, following Chandakirti, Jetokappa goes on to quote the Sutra of the 10 Levels itself, because it's like, you need to know more about the context. What was the Buddha trying to teach then? You know, it's not just a phrase out of nowhere. And there, the Buddha directly connects his phrase, think it over, that these three realms are mind only, to a long teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination. That's what he was teaching. And so Jetokappa quotes, as it explains extensively in the 10 levels, and now I'm quoting the 10 levels. You must conceive thoroughly the forward progression of what arises in reliance and relationship. So, then, zhong, that which are, that's another way of translating dependent origination. That which arises in reliance on something else, and in relationship to it. Well, that would be the tenja. But the arises is the zhongwa. Sorry. Dependent origination is a very long phrase, but we've gotten used to it by now. But it's actually translating pratitya samutpada, maybe you've heard that, which in Tibetan needs 3 terms to it. Tenching drawar zhongwa, arises in dependence and relationship to. And sometimes that's abbreviated in Tibetan to dependent relationship. And sometimes it's abbreviated to Tibetan as dependent origination. But the phrase, in a sense, is always referring to all 3 elements. It has to arise in dependence on something and in relationship to something else. Like, things don't ever just arise in relation to one thing. It lies in dependence upon one thing and relationship to others. So that's almost the notion of causes and conditions. Causes being the thing in reliance upon and relationship to. And so the whole notion of the 12 links is mostly focusing, well, it's each link leads to the next through both a reliance upon and a relationship to. I'll just say it that way. And so this is what the Buddha's teaching in this sutra of the 10 levels. And he's talking about the forward progression in the sense of link 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, as opposed to the reverse progression being when you stop them going backward. And so he says, in that way, think it over. Think about how the suffering heaps are the maker of the great tree of suffering. So the 5 heaps we come into this life with are the maker of the great tree of suffering. And that without someone who experiences the feelings, just these heaps alone bring it all to actuality. So the point here is there's no experiencer, there's no real self there who's doing the experiencing, but suffering arises. Think it over. Because you insist on believing in a maker, all karma comes to be. And I don't have the Sanskrit for this, but remember that a maker is always going to be some version of kur. The root kur means to make, to do. So karma is that which is made. And so what the Buddha is really saying is, because you insist on believing there's someone there who's really doing the doing, that's how the results of doing come to be, even though there's no inherently existent maker. But whatever has no maker ultimately cannot be focused upon as action. So if there's no real doer, you can't find a real done. You can't find a real action. And then he says, think it over. All these 3 realms are mind only. What the one who has gone thus, the Tathagata, divided out for you as the 12 links of existence, and has spoken so honorably, all those links depend upon but a single mind. Sorry, I saw a typo that I had to correct instantly. So I'll say that again. What the one who has gone thus divided out for you as the 12 links of existence, and has spoken so honorably, all of those links depend upon but a single mind. So this is Buddha himself speaking, saying, I, the Tathagata, what the one who has gone, he always refers to himself in the third person in order to emphasize this non-locality of self. He says, what the one who has gone thus divided out for you as the 12 links of existence, and has spoken so honorably, all of those links depend on but a single mind. So it's almost like he's summarizing the 12 links as it's all your mind, folks. And so notice the context now. It's the mind makes karma. And remember our original quotation was about the Buddha having said, the victorious one who did not see the person and so on, those things claimed by those outside the fold, according to their respective scriptures, to be any of them a creator. He said the mind alone is maker of the worlds. And then in a later verse he said, it is stated that every wanderer without exception was born from karma. If you abandon the mind, then even karma would not exist. So the way that the mind, karma depends on the mind. And here he's saying, all 12 links, which all revolve around karma, depend upon a single mind. So then Jethakapa explains, this sutra states then that things are just simply actualized. It's a really hard word there. It means just they come about, they come into being. Without a maker and without someone who experiences feelings. That's much easier to say in Tibetan. Jepapo and Sorwapo. Jepapo is maker, and Sorwapo is one who feels. It explains the meaning of mind only to be the fact that the 12 links depend upon but a single mind. Thus, the word only in the sutra does not rule out the existence of actual objects, i.e. outer matter, but does rule out makers other than the mind. So that's very clearly Geshe Michael's source for the answer to that homework question. How are you doing? Do you need a break? Let's push another 10 minutes because we have slightly longer sessions today to spread out. So the word mind, Jethakapa goes on to reference Vasubandhu. You don't need to worry about that. But I want you to think about this one. Because Vasubandhu says that the word mind is anything which is linked. And the notion of linking is important. You've heard it in the sense of main mind and mental function. But until we really try to meditate on these things, they won't make much sense. When you are doing a meditation on the space of awareness and its contents, and as last night, you can start to notice that there can be pretty much, and I'll say that in a general sense, a single state of mind that can be aware of a memory, for example, and aware of the feeling that arises in reaction to it, good, bad, indifferent. And then piggybacking on that feeling is perhaps a mental affliction. Or maybe first a discrimination, I like this, I don't like that. And then piggybacking on that discrimination is a mental affliction of hatred or jealousy or craving. Right? This is the kind of a chain of reaction that we get all the time in our minds. And so in a very technical Abhidharma sense, which I won't go into too much detail on, there are said to be 5 things which are linked in every state of mind. And it has to do with the fact that there can be a single state of mind perceiving a single or roughly a single object, and then all these other things that are linked with that state of mind. And it's the way, in a sense, the 4 mental heaps work together, why you can have feeling, discrimination, and then all the other mental factors in the 4th heap associated with a single moment of consciousness as the 5th heap. And that could be a visual consciousness, a tactile consciousness, or a mental consciousness. Any one of them. 6. So this becomes really important in being aware of how mental karma gets planted. Because just having a thought arise as an appearance to the mind is not yet karma. It could be it's a result of karma, the fact that it arises. It can be the result of well, I'll use the word as a result of tendencies. There can be tendencies for the mental afflictions that are not a specific seed planted at a specific time in the past. We talked about this a bit in March. I know most of you, very few of you were also here in March, but just so you know, I have taught it before. The notion that a specific seed from a specific deed does not cover the entire panoply of what it means for there to be karma. And there can be tendencies which we carry in our minds from time without beginning, including the tendencies for ignorance itself. And so there can also be tendencies for the mental afflictions, the causes that are just always going in our minds. And so there are these trigger patterns, as we know well from, as we can find out from meditation. One thing comes in and then a certain reaction to it and then a mental affliction on top of that. Even the arising of a mental affliction is not yet karma. Karma comes about when a certain part of the mind tends toward it, grabs onto it, latches onto it, and holds it in a certain way. And that's the putting together that is abhisamskara. You know the word samskara. And it's an active putting together, but the samskara is also the tendency to put it together in a certain similar way in the future, and the fact you have the tendency to put it in a way together in a certain way from the past.
Does that describe link to?
Yes. Yeah. So abhisamskara may, I'm not totally clear yet whether it's actually a different concept or whether it's just a full expansion of a word that gets abbreviated to samskara at another time. But it's definitely what happens in Link 2, is the putting together, the making of traces as I translated it. Can you just tell me what your question is? I may or may not
about
go into it now.
And the definition.
Yeah. I don't want to lose the train of the point that I was making, so we'll get back to samskara. We have a lot more to say about samskara this weekend. But the point I was making is, what does it mean for there to be a linked state of mind? Because the point I actually want to make here is a much broader point, which is only that which is linked to awareness has creative power. Nothing else does. And I want us to be able to think about that almost in a totally non-Buddhist sense. Just you, whoever you are, growing up, all the thoughts you ever had. What does it mean to create something? And can you ever attribute creative power to something that's not aware? Now, in our culture, in a context where, whether we buy it or not, scientific materialism is the status quo, or at least rampant. We almost get used to hearing language that personifies non-aware natural forces. So we hear about amino acids creating life in the oceans of the world billions of years ago. Or we hear about brain matter creating synapses in order to make new patterns, right? So scientific language has begun to use, or rather, those who write or speak in scientific terms have begun to use language appropriated from thousands of years, I'll say thousands of years of human history that has developed terms based on a deep understanding of awareness, mind, creativity, divine creativity, human creativity, and so on. So we have a rich language about creativity. And it's very interesting, and you might pick up on this now next time you read a science article. How they're using language to personify things that most scientists are now saying have no conscious properties. or consciousness is somehow an emergent property of these things that are really physical. So just be aware of it. I'm not going to go into a whole thing on materialism right now. But I just want to suggest to you to think about it yourself deeply. Can you even conceive of something that had no awareness being literally worthy of the word creative? Or is there something about the word creative that, if we take the language and its history and what it is referred to seriously, always implies an awareness that can see multiple things and put them together? Sanskara and the cur in skara is the same cur in karma. See, I'm just looking at this really ancient root of cur, which is also the root of our word create, create. And there's no coincidence in that. We've got the same Indo-European root, cur. So could you have a creative process without the idea of an awareness that can see and that can imagine the future, that can see different parts of things, see relationships between things, put them together in a certain way, and make something new?
What about like advanced technology?
Right. Can you imagine technology without a human being thinking about it?
No. But the technology itself seems like it's creating.
I mean, that artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, we can go all the way to the most sophisticated artificial intelligence, but is it intelligent without the person who programmed it?
So people who still carry ignorance or lack of awareness of creating future suffering, create future suffering.
Oh, sure. So ignorance doesn't mitigate or nullify the fact of awareness.
Yeah.
Now, there's an irony here, because the word marikpa in Tibetan, avidya in Sanskrit, does mean lack of awareness, unaware. But it doesn't mean completely unaware, because all of Buddhism is based on the idea that sentient beings are aware.
So,
And we're aware all the time, and we prove that by being alive, by meditating, by experiencing. So we are definitely aware, even though we are deeply unaware of some crucial things. But it doesn't mean. So actually, this gets back into our bigger meta question about two fundamentally different kinds of mind and two fundamentally different kinds of creators, right? A mind that creates, even though it's the girl in the picture. Did you choose that picture? It's pretty cool. Somebody chose that picture. But the girl who's blind, we're that kind of creator, okay? We've got the veil on, and we're going to get more into that veil today. But we're still creating, and we're aware of a lot. We're just not aware of some crucial things that we need to be aware of in order to create well. Yeah. And so then there's that other creative awareness that is aware of everything and not unaware of anything. And then, yeah, how cool would that be if we could be creative, knowing the full ramifications of action and knowing the way that the reality we're working with as we create exists. So I'm not going to belabor that anymore, actually, because we have lots to do. But just, okay. I think this meditation is actually extremely important for insight into emptiness also. If you try to imagine matter existing by itself with no awareness of it, like it's a gokchao, right? Can you try to imagine an atom that existed in a world where there's no consciousness? Because it is what is posited by the status quo history of the universe right now. The universe developed, and somewhere along the line, consciousness started to, because matter got complex enough, consciousness started to appear. That is, I hope it's not status quo. I don't like using that word because I don't want to sort of surrender to that as being status quo. There are many, many people who think that. There are many, many people in the world who think that right now. So even in our own minds, because we're inundated with that kind of view, and it's underlying so much of our news and our science news and our medical news, our archaeological news, our geological news, our very concept of evolution on this planet, multiple species on this planet, is all somehow based in a view that's actually only a couple hundred years old or less, that posits a material universe forming and then consciousness being a little add-on later. And yet, as an emptiness meditation, if you can try to find what an atom, much less an entire universe of atoms, would look like with no consciousness, how forces could interact with no consciousness if you don't attribute conscious words to them. And this is what I think is kind of interesting, that a lot of scientific thinkers are attributing conscious words to matter all the time, but then pretending they happen. Because you say the forces interact, or they, this particle over here and this sort of matter, antimatter over here communicate. Does the word communicate make any sense apart from awareness? Can there be a right side of an atom and a left side of an atom? Or, of course, no scientist thinks of atoms that way anymore, but can there be a one part of a spin and another part of a spin? Can there be a thing that exists here and a thing to which it is attracted, whether by gravitational force or electromagnetic force or anything? Can we even conceive of that without the perspective of a mind that can see both things? So I just encourage you to do this as an emptiness meditation. Try to imagine a mindless world, a mindless atom, a mindless particle, a mindless planet. And I admit I'm kind of attached to this sentence, or these couple sentences, so I'm going to read them to you. It is a mind that can connect images in a sequence together to call them, quote, change over time. It is mind that can envision that which has not yet occurred and remember that which was past in order to draw a thread between them, to even talk of change. You can't even conceive of change without a mind that can hold past and future. It is actually impossible to speak of causation. One thing before, one thing after, one thing depend upon, one thing that depends upon it, much less creation. And I distinguish those as creation implying there is some kind of intelligent force. Causation, well, maybe it could happen without an intelligent force, but the jury's out on that. But those words have different valences in our language. But I'm saying, how can we speak of causation, much less creation, without implicit reference to one or more observers? An utterly blind particle of matter, if one could even imagine such a thing, could never even, quote, know that it had moved. Because if there's no mind to be able to conceive of point A, how can point B differ from point A if there's no one to know the difference? And I believe, and this is only from listening to Master Alan Wallace about it, but there are some very cutting-edge contemporary quantum cosmologists. I almost lost the thought as I tried to say it, because I feel so out of my depth in it. That would say that time itself is a product of measurement. so that without measurement, you'd have a universe that is frozen in time. But frozen time is the phrase, but it's the idea that differentiation across time only occurs through measurement. And what I will add to that is measurement only occurs with consciousness, because you can have measuring devices going on for 24 hours at a time. If no one ever reads the readouts, nothing has been known about that measurement. In fact, how could movement even be conceived without reference to a measurement of space, which also requires an observer? Is it even intelligible, oops, we spoke of mind again, to conceive, but without a mind, mind you, because we're trying to imagine a world with no mind, of causation or transformation from one state of affairs to another, yet with none of them observed, therefore no difference identified, without a knowing consciousness to be aware and take its measure. And I love the idea that the word pramana, or in Tibetan tema, actually the root meaning of that word is to take the measure of something. So a valid perception is a perception that has taken the measure. A valid cognizer, that which has the capacity to measure reality. So I'll leave you with that thought. Have a nice break. Let's do 15 minutes, so please come back at 5 to 11, is that? No, 5 to 12, yeah. 5 to 12.